All right, today I'm going to go over a little mini project similar to shapes 1, 2, and 3. It's going to be called layers and lines. The goal for this project is going to be working with adding new layers, subtracting layers, hiding layers, changing the opacity, changing the stacking order, working with lines. We will be using the drawing styluses today, using the shape tool, and using the text tool. Okay, so here is the worksheet. You can find this in your binder. We're going to start with a new file, just like we did with shapes 1, 2, and 3. You're going to go to File, New, 8.5 by 11 inches, because that's a piece of computer paper, 300 resolution. And there's some things we need to talk about in the Layers panel. So in Photoshop, the Layers panel, I'll show you after I get this open here. Just create a new document, and we can label this lines and layers, 8.5 inches, 11, 300 resolution. Go ahead and create. So over here in your layers panel, there's some information that we need to go over. So to make a new layer, you are going to click on the bottom right here, this little piece of paper with the corner turned up. It's next to the garbage can. When you click on that, it's going to create a new layer. Okay, so you can see it right here. This checkerboard background is Photoshop's way of telling you that that layer is transparent. So we have our white background, which is our piece of paper. And right now we have layer 1, which is transparent. So I'm just going to use a brush tool here, and I'm just going to show you something. So right now I've got this little squiggly line in layer 1. I can click on the eyeball here to hide that layer. It's just temporarily hidden. I can click on that eyeball to bring that layer back up again. I can select this layer by making it light gray, and I can hit delete on my keyboard, and that layer goes away. I can undo. If I hit Control Z on my keyboard, it'll go back one step. It'll keep going back up to 100 times by hitting Control Z. Okay, so that's how you make a new layer. That's how you hide layers. You can change the opacity. We talked about that with shapes 1 so that it's more translucent. So we're going to have, in the end, we are going to have technically 16 total layers here. So layer 1, which we're going to name vertical, we're going to have 10 vertical lines using the brush tool. No two lines can be the same. Layer 2, we're going to name horizontal. You're going to do 10 horizontal lines, so left to right, vertical is top to bottom. No two brushes being the same. Then layers 3 through 13, you're going to use the shape tool to create 10 shapes. They should overlap and they may repeat. Use the move tool and hold Alt to duplicate the shape. To rotate or change the size of your shape, you're going to hit Control T, which is a shortcut for the transform tool. If you remember from your last shapes assignments, the shapes automatically go into their own layers. So you do not need to make a new layer for each shape. And then after that, you're going to do layer 14 through 16, where you're going to use 3 different styles of text using the text tool. It's a capital letter T. Those will also go into their own layer, I believe. I will let you know a little bit later when I do it. And then the last thing, this is the most important part. You're going to use the opacity option in your layers panel to blend and combine all layers into an interesting design. Remember, you can change the stacking order and hide layers by turning off the eyeball icon next to the layer. Then you're going to save it in your computer graphics folder as layers and lines. So as you notice, you're going to have 16 layers. It's going to be a lot of jumbled up information. You may need to, at the end, go through and hide some layers, combine some layers, blend some layers, play with that stacking order. Again, play with the opacity. The goal is to make this into something that looks interesting. You don't want it to look like a jumbled up mess. Okay, so that is the goal. So I'm going to delete this layer here, and I'm going to make a new layer. So the piece of paper with the corner turned up, and I'm going to name this vertical. If you just click in here, you can label those layers. Now, it's important, especially with the Warhol assignment, to make sure you are drawing in the correct layer. So right now I've got my vertical layer. I'm going to come over here, my toolbox, and I'm going to choose the brush tool. Okay, so in my options panel, I have lots of options for my brush. So right now I'm working with this brush. The size is 180. My mode is normal. My opacity is 50. My flow is 100. Okay, if you want a little bit more control over your brushes, you can go to View. No, I'm sorry, you can go to Window and Brushes, and it'll bring up this little icon over here, which are your brushes. So you can scroll through here and you can see what those brushes are going to look like when you use them. Okay, so you can go through and you can choose a brush that you like. Okay, maybe I want to do the dune grass brush. And again, I can change the size of that brush. I can make that brush bigger. Or I can make that brush smaller. And then the color is going to come from right down here. So I've got that purple. So maybe I'm going to stick with kind of like a green. And I can go ahead and I can draw using that brush, except I accidentally did horizontal and I'm supposed to be doing vertical. So I'm going to Control Z that mistake. If this bothers you, you can hit that little arrow to get rid of it. And I can draw. So I can layer this up if I want to do a few different kind of line work here. I can just do one single line. It's kind of, you know, what you decide to do. We're experimenting right now. Okay, so that's technically one brush that I used. So I need to pick a different brush. Maybe I'm going to do the chalk brush. And I'm going to make this bigger so that I can see it. I'm also going to change the color just to add a little interest. So the more I kind of overlap, the darker that color looks. Okay, so I made my line using the chalk brush. So technically I have two right now. So I'm going to keep going until I get 10 and just changing and trying out a different brush each time, maybe changing the sizes, just trying some different things just to kind of see what I have to work with. This is going to be really helpful when it comes time to work on your Andy Warhol inspired portraits. Okay, so technically you would do 10 of these. I'm going to move along. I'm going to make another new layer. I'm going to double click that layer and I'm going to label this horizontal, Horizontal. And this is going to be where I do my lines that are left to right. Again, you want to make sure that you are in the correct layer. So make sure that your horizontal layer is selected and it is light gray. And I'm going to continue with this. I'm going to show you a couple other things that you can do. So let's say I'm working with the rough, or I'll work with the round point thin bristle. If you go to your brush settings, which is next to, so right now we're working with brushes. If you go to your brush settings, this is where you can change some things. So I can change the shape of my brush. Maybe I want to do a round blunt brush or a round curve brush. So you can change the type of brush. You can change the amount of bristles that you have in that brush. Maybe you have a really thin brush. Maybe you have a thicker brush. The length of the brush stroke, how thick that brush stroke is, the stiffness of that brush, the angle of that brush. All right, so these are all different things that you can change in your brush settings. Okay, so now let me just change my color here. Maybe for my horizontal, I want to work more with some blues. So I'm going to go left to right. That looks kind of cool. So if I keep layering it up, it gets a little bit darker. The reason for this is my opacity is at 50%. If I bump my opacity up to 100%, that's not see-through at all. Or if I bump it down to less, you'll see that it is transparent. So you have control over that part of your brush. I'm going to undo this because it got a little bit thick and a little bit much. I personally kind of like playing with the opacity. So I don't like to do 100% opacity. I like to kind of see what I can do with layering. So I would also like you to try that. See what that looks like if you start layering colors up. Okay, now I'm going to grab a different brush tool. And as you can tell, there are just tons and tons of brushes that you can work with. There are even some more. I added in some of the legacy brushes by using that gear, like we did to show all of your shapes when we were working with the custom shapes tool. I really like the calligraphic brushes just because to me they feel like an actual paintbrush, which is kind of nice. And when you're using that drawing stylus, you can really get like a painterly approach by using these calligraphic brushes. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and do 10 horizontal lines. Then if I go back to my worksheet, so I have my 10 vertical lines by 10 horizontal lines. Now layers 3 through 13, I'm going to be using the shape tool to create 10 shapes. They should overlap and they may repeat. So here's my shape tool. You can use any of these shape tools. Obviously, the custom shape tools are kind of the most fun, but you can definitely do this with circles, squares, whatever you really feel like doing. So I'm going to try to kind of stick with some more organic looking shapes. So maybe this grass I'll use. And I'm going to change my fill color. Maybe I'll work with a tan color, this kind of grayish brown. So I'm going to draw that on. Notice when I draw this, oh, look, it automatically made its own layer. So I've got shape 1. And maybe right away, I know I want to change that opacity. And maybe I want to do another one kind of going over the top. This is where I wrote about that you can overlap these shapes. So right now I have 3 shapes going on. And they're overlapping, they're going off the page. They look kind of interesting. So I'm going to continue with this until I get all of the shapes made that I need. So maybe now I want to work with some of these fern leaves. And I'm going to change that color, maybe to this kind of lime greeny color. And I'm going to start drawing those on. Remember, if you hold Shift will keep this shape proportional. Okay, because I clicked on my background layer before, it automatically put this shape right above it. So if that bothers me, because I'm kind of a perfectionist that way, I'm just going to move that shape all the way to the top. Okay, now let's say I don't like the angle of this. Like I want it to be more up and down instead of left to right. If I hit Control T on my keyboard, I can rotate that shape. Notice how if I hover above that corner, it gives me a rounded arrow. So I can literally rotate this. And now let's say that I want, and then I just hit enter to keep that size. Let's say I want to flip it so that it's the opposite. So instead of kind of curving to the left, I want this to curve to the right. I can go to edit, transform, and flip horizontally, and it will flip that. Again, I'm going to kind of just start changing the opacity right away. Now, if I like this shape and I want to make more of them, I can hit Alt on my keyboard and notice how it gives me that double arrow. Ta-da! I can start layering these up and hitting Control T and kind of changing their angle so they're not all the same. So if I hold Alt, then I made another one, Control T, maybe change the angle a little bit more. And you can see it's shape 4 copy, shape 4 copy 2. So it just keeps labeling those as you go. So I'm just going to come down here so you can see what that looks like. Okay, so right now I've got vertical, horizontal. I've got 4, 5, 6 shapes. So I'd have to keep going until I would have all 10 shapes. Then when you're done with that, your layers 14 through 16, you're going to use 3 different types of font or text. So you're going to go to the capital letter T, which is short for your text. You could do horizontal typing or vertical. I'm just going to do horizontal today because that's what I use the most of. Up here in your options panel, you can choose what type of font you would like. So you can see there's all different little samples of what those fonts look like. Let's see, what do I want? I want something kind of that's going to go with maybe this Felix tilting. And I can change the size of my font. It goes up to 72, but you can type in whatever number you want. Let's say I want to do 101 for my type. I can change that number. The color is going to come from up here. So right now I'm on black. Maybe I want that to be like a navy blue. And I've got this little cursor. So in Photoshop, all you have to do is just click on where you want to start typing. Like I'm just going to click with my mouse. And it's going to bring up just some words here just to show you the size and what that's going to look like. If I just hit delete, you can see my cursor is right here. And I can just start typing whatever I want. So maybe I'm going to write nature. Okay, if I think that's too big, I can highlight that and I can make that smaller. Okay, or I can type something in. Maybe I want to make it 90. Okay, maybe I want to, whoops. Maybe I want to move this. I have to make sure that I'm in the correct layer. So I'm in my T, my nature layer, and I'm going to use my move tool and I can kind of move this where I want. Your move tool, my gosh, it keeps going back to those vertical lines. The move tool moves things 5 pixels at a time. So if you want to nudge something, the best way to do it is to use the arrows on your keyboard. So watch what happens to the word nature. It nudges it into place. I'm using my up arrow, my right arrow, my left arrow. Now, another thing that I noticed here is my text is right above my background layer. So if I zoom in by using my magnifying glass, you can see how my letters are underneath some of those shapes that I made. My letters are also underneath my lines that I made. So that's kind of cool. If I like that look, I can keep it. Let's say, oh, I really wanted my words on top of everything. I can click on this word and I can drag it all the way to the top where those 2 double blue lines are, and I can drop it. So now it's on top of everything. Here I can drag it underneath those shapes, or I can continue dragging underneath the horizontal or underneath the vertical. So you can change, that's called your stacking order. All right, so I've got to write 3 more words in here. Let me go back to my worksheet. So using 3 different styles of text. Then at the end, you're going to use your opacity option in your layers panel to blend and combine those layers. Remember, you can change the stacking order and hide layers by turning off the eyeball icon next to that layer. So I already talked about the stacking order. That's what I was just working on. But you can, let's say I really hate those vertical lines. I could hide those. I don't have to show those. Are these ferns got a little bit much? Maybe I, don't want all of those showing. Maybe I want to get rid of that one. That was just a little bit busy. Okay, so you are allowed to hide and show whatever layers you want. You can also go back. Let's say this layer here is a little bit too dark. My opacity is 100. I could make that a little bit lighter to make that kind of blend in a little bit more. So at the end, you have the options to hide layers, change the opacity, and change the stacking order. The last thing I'm going to show you is something for your background. So I have my background layer. It is white right now, but what happens if I fill that background layer in with a color? Let's say I just do this let's do this kind of grayish, bluish purple color. And I fill that in. Okay, that's really ugly. don't like it, I can hit Control Z on my keyboard, and I can come over here and I can pick a different color. Maybe I want to do more of like a bluish, and I can fill that in. So your background does not have to be white. You can fill your background in with a color if you would like. So when you're done, you should have some of these layers showing, some of them not. Kind of play around with your stacking order, your opacity, and hiding layers. Once you're done, go ahead and save this. File, save as. I have already named it layers and lines. My save as type is Photoshop. And look at that. It remembered from yesterday that I was working in my computer graphics folder. Make sure this is my name. And I can go ahead and hit save. And it is in there. So good luck with layers and lines. Experiment, try different things, be creative, but also think about this as an overall composition. You want it to look pleasant to the eye. You want it to be interesting. So good luck.